Chapter 25. Wand of Elder. Draco didn't apparate into the front garden of headquarters. Instead, he materialized in Hermione's room. Before he could fully take in his surroundings, Hermione launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around him in an embrace that nearly knocked him off his feet. "You're alive," she gasped, clutching him so tightly that he could feel the frantic beating of her heart. "Are you hurt?" She pulled back slightly, her face drained of color as she began to examine him. "I'm all right," Draco panted, trying to catch his breath. Yeah, I'm here." Her panicked expression didn't ease. Instead, small, choked sounds escaped her throat, and her eyes brimmed with tears. "I thought you were dead," she said, her voice trembling and high-pitched. "I really thought." "I did, too." Draco felt a sting in his eyes, but he fought to keep them open, unwilling to blink, needing to absorb every detail of her trembling lips, the sheen in her eyes. It all seemed so fragile. They moved back together, swaying in each other's embrace. A strange, hollow feeling began to expand within Draco, as if a bottomless pit had opened in the center of his chest. He didn't understand it. He tried to remind himself that they were both alive and safe, that warmth and comfort should fill him, but all his senses felt muted. "The others?" He finally managed to ask. "They're all right?" Hermione whispered, though her voice was still shaky. "And your group?" Draco couldn't answer. His gaze drifted to the wall, where he could see the dark stain of blood soaking through Andromeda's prison clothes. "She had died in an Azkaban uniform, Draco?" Hermione pulled away again, her lips now colorless. "I have to talk to Tonks," he rasped. Together, they made their way downstairs, where the rest of the Order had gathered. Even with the room magically expanded, it was so packed that there was barely any space to stand. Draco surveyed the scene with a sense of detachment. Everyone was present, but several were bleeding or appeared to be under a curse. Luna lay on the sofa, her expression distant as she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Unconscious, her burn, which was more than just a simple hex, had worsened since it was first inflicted. Kingsley was tending to her. Nearby, where Draco stood by the steps, Professor McGonagall spoke to Harry Potter and Ron Weasley. "We've spread the word about the safe houses' locations throughout the yard. The prisoners should have disapparated to one of the 4 safe houses, and Kingsley will finish connecting our fireplaces within the next several days." Just then, Percy Weasley let out a startled yelp, his horn-rimmed glasses slipping askew on his thin nose. He pointed to the door to the hall, where Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy had just appeared. The sight of his parents only intensified the surreal atmosphere. Draco had never seen them look so afraid. His father's cheeks were flushed, as if stained by sherry, and Narcissa clutched a copy of last night's Evening Prophet, her hand trembling. "Where is he?" Narcissa demanded. "Where is my son?" "I'm here," Draco said hoarsely. "I'm under Polyjuice, Mother. I'm all right." Tonks and Lupin, who hadn't noticed him on the steps, turned sharply in his direction. "Draco," Lupin said urgently, "what happened? Were the others captured?" A hush fell over the room. Draco gripped the banister tightly, suddenly feeling nauseous. It would have been easier to face Azkaban than to stand here. The one forced to deliver the terrible news, there. He struggled to steady his voice. "They didn't." "Where are my parents?" Tonks cried, pushing through the crowd. Lupin caught her at the door, holding her back. "They're dead," Draco rasped. A piercing scream erupted from Tonks, and she sank down, with Lupin half supporting her weight. "How?" he asked over her sobs. Draco recounted the last half hour as best as he could, while the room filled with stifled gasps and murmurs. When he described, as Wood and Longbottom displayed their futile heroism, Angelina Johnson buried her face in the pale shoulder of George Weasley, tears streaming down her cheeks. A low, anguished sound escaped Lupin when he learned of Ted and Andromeda's fate. "Who did it?" Tonks demanded, her eyes wide with panic. "Who cast the curses? Was it Crabbe? Greyback? Rowell?" Draco shook his head. "I don't know, I couldn't tell." Something compelled him to glance at his parents. To anyone else, they might have seemed unaffected, but Draco could see the tension in his mother's grip on the door jamb. "But Crabbe's dead," he continued, his voice flat. "Or as good as, a Dementor kissed him. It's the only reason I got away." Those words brought no solace to Tonks. She sagged deeper into Lupin's embrace, and Draco felt his own knees trembling beneath him. Hermione, standing a few steps above him, made a small movement in his direction. He shifted his weight against the banister. "They were trying to get back to you," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." He braced himself for Tonks to look at him with anger, to accuse him of not doing enough to save her parents. But instead, she met his gaze and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. He nodded back, and as her knees buckled, so did his. #Historic Breach at Azkaban, the insurgent group known as the Order of the Phoenix, writes Rita Skeeter, special correspondent, has struck another blow to Wizarding Society, this time at Azkaban Prison. Near midnight on Friday, saboteurs orchestrated the violent breakout of the entire population of Azkaban, which includes over 600 prisoners. The Daily Prophet can exclusively report that this revolt was led by convict Ron Weasley, 17, a close associate of the infamous Harry Potter. Other criminals now at large include those responsible for the massacre at Malfoy Manor. December has arrived, and the grieving wizarding community faces even more heart-wrenching losses. Eyewitnesses recount how the Dementors, once steadfast guardians of Azkaban, were thrown into chaos during the prisoners' revolt. The brutal assaults by the Order, combined with the Dementors' confusion, have resulted in 32 casualties so far. Azkaban, long regarded as an impenetrable fortress, had not witnessed a mass breakout until 2 years ago when several prominent members of Wizarding Society, wrongfully imprisoned, were finally liberated. At that time, this paper failed to address the unjust charges that led to those citizens' convictions. For a full retraction, please see page 7. In a Saturday morning address to the nation, Minister for Magic Pius Thickness declared, "With the destruction of Azkaban Prison, long a bastion of lawful wizarding Britain, we fear that the next goal of the Order of the Phoenix, and its unhinged commander, Harry Potter, is a full-scale coup." Thickness proceeded to announce several new national safety protocols. First, Diagon Alley has once again been placed under a no-apparition mandate to bolster security at one of Wizarding London's most historic sites. Furthermore, anticipating that Potter and his allies may resort to dark magic without hesitation, the Ministry of Magic plans to distribute pamphlets on the basics of dark magic. These materials are currently being taught at Hogwarts School to prepare the next generation for self-defense. Despite these efforts, unease lingers across the nation regarding security. Disturbing reports from within the ministry suggest that Minister Thickness, who has been seen in public experiencing unexplained fits, may be struggling under the pressure of these high-profile attacks. "Thickness isn't up to it," remarked a candid source from the minister's office, who spoke to the Prophet on the condition of anonymity. "I give him 3 months at most. As for who will succeed him, Wizarding Society is left to wonder. Britain doesn't need another bureaucrat or a department head draped in fancy robes. What we need is someone who recognized the threat Potter posed and took action to stop it. Right now, we need a bloody savior." That night, the Order held a memorial. Throughout the evening, they shared stories and memories of the 5 who had fallen. Draco knew better than to ask his mother if she would attend, even though she hadn't slept or eaten since he delivered the news of her sister's death. All day, she had drifted around their tent like a ghost, her hand clutching a cup of cold tea. Draco was at a loss. His mother had never shown any emotion toward her lost sister other than disgust or shame, but when he returned from the memorial, he found his parents staring silently into the fire, and he could almost see the memories locked away behind his mother's blue eyes. "Sit, Draco," his father said, his lips barely moving. Draco obeyed. "We feared the worst this morning," Lucius murmured. "You could have been killed. You must never allow Potter to drag you into something like this again." Draco searched for an excuse. "I didn't realize how far it would go," he replied mechanically. "I thought they'd just want me to be a lookout or something. I was trying to blend in." "Your life," Narcissa said, "is more important than maintaining appearances." It was the first thing she had said since morning. Draco stared into the fire, feeling resentment simmer within him. It made him feel slightly more alive. "You can't have it both ways," he muttered. "You're the ones who want me to spy on the Order or whatever it is, get information back to the Dark Lord so we can rejoin. If I'm going to get information out of the Order, they need to trust me, which means doing things like this." "Then you're considering the possibility," Lucius stated. Draco's resentment faded into exhaustion. He couldn't muster any concern for his parents' maddening nostalgia for the past, couldn't shake the weight of his family's expectations. Anger at his mother for hiding the truth about Andromeda flickered in the back of his mind, but it was overshadowed by a profound exhaustion. The Dementors had drained him, leaving him with just a few hours of restless sleep throughout the day. He longed for nothing more than to escape, to be unconscious, free from thoughts and feelings. "I'm considering every possibility," Draco said stiffly, forcing himself to stand. He walked down the hall to his bedroom, his mind a chaotic swirl of emotions. In the aftermath of the battle, he hadn't had a moment to change. Now, he stripped off his robes, still coated in rock dust, along with the damp clothes beneath. He stepped into the shower, letting the water wash away the grime, then clumsily pulled on his pajamas, swaying slightly as fatigue washed over him. Barely resting his head on the pillow, sleep claimed him almost instantly. Suddenly, he found himself sitting in a compartment on the Hogwarts Express. Crabbe and Goyle flanked him, while Pansy, Blaise, and Theo sat across from him. "Really, Draco," Blaise sniffed, "I don't see what the problem is. I've bought our suites for the past 6 years. I just don't want to go out there, that's all," Draco replied dismissively, glancing at the compartment door. "But I want an everlasting gobstopper." Pansy scowled. "Yeah," Theo chimed in, "and you owe me about a dozen pumpkin pasties." Draco's irritation began to bubble beneath the surface. The compartment swayed slightly, and outside, the countryside darkened while the lights inside grew unnaturally bright. "I suppose you two think I should buy you cauldron cakes," he said, casting a pointed look at Crabbe and Goyle. They erupted in their usual grunting laughter. "Yeah," Crabbe said with a grin. "That's right, fine," Draco replied, standing up. His friends rose alongside him, their faces blurring oddly in the dim light. "Go on," Goyle urged, folding his arms. They formed a tight circle around him, and Draco faced the compartment door, steeling himself for whatever lay beyond. He didn't want to step outside. But deep down, he knew he had to. With a deep breath, he pulled the door open and stepped into a dim stone corridor. The moment he recognized the chilling halls of Azkaban, panic surged through him. He spun around, only to find that the compartment door had vanished, replaced by a solitary torch flickering in a jagged bracket. He began to walk, his pace quickening until he was running, desperately searching for an exit. Any door would do. "Help. Draco, help." A voice echoed behind him. He turned to see Andromeda lying on the cold floor, clutching Ted's hand. Their eyes were filled with pain and terror, and blood pooled around them, soaking into the flagstones. Draco tried to move toward them. But as he looked down, he realized his feet were sinking into the stone. The ground was swallowing him, inch by inch, while dark pools of blood from Ted and Andromeda crept toward him, glimmering like garnets in the torchlight. Soon, he was submerged to his knees, the stones chilling against his skin like icy water. A rattle sounded behind him, and he twisted around to see a Dementor looming at the end of the corridor. It raised its skeletal hands to its hood. Draco fumbled for his wand, but his hands were trapped in the unforgiving stone. That's when he noticed the 4 limp bodies sprawled around him: Longbottom, Cresswell, Wood, and an unnamed Muggle man. Their faces were turned toward him. Their unseeing eyes locked on his own. Andromeda's struggles grew weaker, and Ted lay motionless. His aunt reached out to him, her gaze filled with accusation. "Draco," she said, her voice trembling and rattling as if it were being pulled from the depths of despair. Then the Dementor leaned closer, its scabbed gray skin stretched tight over its hollow eye sockets. In that moment, Draco jolted awake, screaming into his pillow. He thrashed in his sheets, desperate to free himself, his body drenched in sweat. He was freezing, his heart racing as the remnants of the nightmare clung to him like a shroud. His mind was filled with a blank terror that left him disoriented as he looked around the room. He couldn't even comprehend where he was or that he had been asleep. He bolted out of bed, stumbling into the bathroom and painfully knocking his elbow against the sink. His heart raced, pounding against his ribs. It was only when he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror that reality began to seep back in. It was just a dream, he told himself. Just a dream. But tears began to well up, burning their way free. A harsh sob escaped his throat, and he instinctively covered his eyes with his forearm, unable to bear the sight of his own face. More sobs racked his body, each one shaking him to his core. His mind was a chaotic swirl of dark colors, devoid of any lucid thoughts. A sickly, violent pulse throbbed in his stomach. Before he realized what he was doing, he was fleeing his room, rushing through the twins' tent and out into the moonlit garden. In less than a minute, he found himself back inside the kitchen of Potter Cottage. As he closed the door behind him, Draco drew in slow, deliberate breaths. The enchanted plate on the wall caught his eye, where the painted rooster still pecked at its seeds. There was the table where he, Hermione, and Potter had spent countless hours planning, cocooned in safety. He wiped his face, his hands finally steadying. The cottage offered him a sense of relief. It had become as much of a home as he had left, but now that he was inside, he understood why he had come here. Doubts coiled tightly around him, paralyzing him in place. He hesitated at the hall, imagining himself knocking on Hermione's door and interrupting the peaceful sleep she desperately needed. When she saw him in this state, worry would crease her brow. She might even pity him. Did he really want her to see him like this? He caught a glimpse of himself in the window's reflection, disheveled hair, tear-streaked eyelids, and the pallor of his skin. A bitter taste filled his mouth. Was he truly so weak, so childish, that he was running to her for comfort after a nightmare? He was sure Potter and Weasley would never have done this. He slipped back out into the garden, where the nearly full moon hung overhead, casting a silver glow across the expansive, starry sky. He reassured himself that nothing was closing in on him, yet his heart raced, the remnants of the nightmare still looming like an ominous hand poised to grasp his shoulder. When he heard a creak behind him, his heart dropped. He spun around, almost losing his footing as he stepped back. But then, his frantic thoughts began to settle. There stood Hermione on the steps, her eyes red and puffy. Without exchanging a word, he understood everything. He had imagined Hermione sleeping soundly in her bed, but he was mistaken. She had been lying awake, in tears. She had heard him return to the cottage and knew it was him. She had wanted him close, too. They moved toward each other simultaneously. The kiss that followed was neither a relief nor a simple act of kindness. It was a painful, awkward press of lips, a desperate attempt at resuscitation. Hermione held him so tightly that his ribs ached, and when she bit down on his lower lip, a jolt shot through him, reaching his fingertips. He wished she would do it again, with more intensity. He gently guided her away from the door and the patio, into the darkened strip of garden beside the cottage, where shadows enveloped them completely. Draco sank against the brick wall, holding her close and inhaling the scent of her still damp curls, allowing his mind to quiet. Their hands fumbled together, their breaths mingled, and deep within him, he felt the stirrings of hope, the same hope from which his Patronus had sprung. It couldn't erase the memories, nor could it give him the words he needed, but it filled a part of the emptiness inside him. For now, that was all he could ask for. They began to meet each night. At times, Draco felt that the promise of his next stolen hour with Hermione was the only thing keeping him afloat. The nights were plagued by variations of the same haunting dream, and the days were nothing short of chaotic. Following the breakout, the Potter. The cottage had transformed into a makeshift tent city, its gardens now adorned with a patchwork of fabrics. Fortunately, as the week progressed, the number of tents began to dwindle, with members of the order relocating to safer houses. A once disused Muggle resort, a damp hotel, a crumbling fortress, and even an ancient monastery had been repurposed to accommodate their growing numbers. Each site now buzzed with the presence of Azkaban's former inmates. The challenge of securing enough food and water for nearly 650 people was monumental, but the Order's extensive network of supporters rose to the occasion. Before Aberforth's exposure, he had discreetly shared the order's drop location with a select group of trusted allies. The recent breakout from Azkaban had ignited a surge of support, and every day, the cave serving as the drop site overflowed with well-stocked hampers and sacks of essential supplies, all of which needed to be distributed to the safe houses. One evening, during a meeting, Kingsley addressed the group. "The real question," he said, "is how to organize ourselves. We finally have substantial numbers, and now we need to mobilize these forces against the Death Eaters across the country." He turned to Ron. "You coordinated them in Azkaban, Weasley, what's your take?" Ron's ears flushed crimson at being singled out, but he quickly gathered his thoughts. "I doubt everyone will be ready for that. They've just come out of prison, right? Many of them will be too weak to fight or simply too frightened. Plus, there are those who aren't even aligned with the Order. They ended up in Azkaban just for crossing the Death Eaters. Like the Parkinsons, they're not about to rush to the front lines for us, even if we did just save their lives." Arthur Weasley's expression turned grave. "I must admit, I'm concerned about the security of keeping people like that in Order safe houses." "Indeed," Fleur chimed in, "who's to say they won't reveal the locations?" Broad-shouldered Sturgis Podmore raised his hand. "I'd be willing to obliviate their memories of the safe houses. We could return them to London. They might reintegrate into society," suggested Ron tentatively. "No," Draco interjected sharply. "That'll just get them captured and interrogated." "Here's an idea," Ron continued, undeterred. "What if we sorted them all?" The Order looked at him, puzzled. Undaunted, Ron grabbed a piece of parchment and began to scribble 4 symbols. "We have 4 safe houses. Right?" It made me think of the Sorting Hat. What if we assign each safe house a specific purpose and move people into them based on how they can contribute to the Order? "That could be a good move, Ron," Lupin agreed, extending his hand for the parchment. Flanked by Kingsley and a bleary-eyed Tonks, Lupin studied the symbols for a moment before spreading the parchment flat on the coffee table, allowing the entire Order to gather around for a closer look. "Well," Tonks said, tapping the symbol representing the fortress, "this one's obviously a great choice for those who want to fight. It offers extra protection in case of counterattacks." "I thought so too," Lupin replied, pointing to the hotel. "This more comfortable location could be for those who can't assist our efforts, whether they're injured, recuperating, or uncertain of their loyalties, but whom we still need to keep safe." Professor McGonagall scrutinized the parchment and then pointed to the monastery. "This one is centrally located, making it the best option for those who wish to write letters to Order sympathizers or help with supply collections." Kingsley finally touched the symbol for the resort. "Then this should be designated for gathering and interpreting Death Eater intelligence. We can spread the word throughout our network that any tips on vulnerabilities or enemy activities should be sent here." And so it was decided. Each safe house would be assigned 2 or 3 Order guardians who could return to headquarters immediately in the event of an attack. Draco felt a sense of relief. Although the Potter cottage was still bustling after this adjustment, it no longer felt overcrowded to the point of collapse. This made it easier for him, Hermione, and others to breathe a little easier. It was time for Potter and Weasley to return to their own pursuits. With a full afternoon finally to themselves, they locked themselves in the nursery upstairs. Bathed in the long, thin shafts of wintry light, Draco felt an unexpected tension in the air, especially since it was the first time they were alone together since October. Weasley cleared his throat. "Look, before you say anything, I'm sorry for running out last autumn. What I said just before I left, I didn't really mean any of it." "You don't need to apologize, Ron," Hermione replied, her cheeks flushed pink. "Yeah," Potter chimed in, "you've made up for it about 100 times since then." Ron glanced uncertainly at Draco, who shrugged and added, "You can grovel a little more if you'd like, Weasley." Laughter erupted among them, and the tension in Draco's chest began to dissipate. The atmosphere felt lighter, and they quickly filled Weasley in on every Horcrux-related event from the past few months. It was a relief to shift their focus back to their shared mission, and Draco had to admit. Weasley was an excellent audience. He gasped, exclaimed, and swore as they recounted their adventures, infiltrating Rita Skeeter's house, stealing Slytherin's locket at the Christmas gala and destroying both the diadem and the locket, but Weasley was particularly intrigued by the silver doe Patronus. You still don't know who sent it, with all these people at headquarters, and it doesn't belong to any of them? We think it's someone who's still undercover, working for the Ministry, Hermione explained. That could be how they got hold of the bequests. You see, if only we could get in touch with them, they could be a big help. Clearly, Dumbledore really trusted them. And speaking of things Dumbledore didn't tell us, Potter added, nodding toward Draco. Draco hadn't thought much about the Elder Wand amidst the chaos of the past few days. Now, he reached into his pocket and pulled it out, presenting it to Weasley. When they explained its significance, Weasley's jaw dropped in astonishment. No, he breathed, that can't be. No way. It is, Hermione replied, her gaze fixed on the wand with a hint of distrust, but as long as it's loyal to Snape, it's dangerous. Dangerous? It's brilliant. Weasley exclaimed, his enthusiasm bubbling over. If Harry can just beat Snape, he'll have a secret weapon that none of the Death Eaters know about. A distant look washed over him. If we can come up with a plan to get Harry into Hogwarts. Surprise Snape somehow. But Draco had already traveled down that path of thought countless times. You'll never surprise Snape. Half the Death Eaters and the Order thought he was a double agent for years. He'll have been preparing for attacks from every direction all that time. He traced his fingertips over the Elder Wand's engravings. But I think there might be a way to win the wand without defeating Snape in a duel. You do? Hermione asked, her surprise evident. Why? Because I used it during the breakout, Draco explained. On the battlements, I lost my wand and managed to cast a Patronus with the Elder Wand, a real Patronus. Heat crept up his neck. Despite their secret meetings over the past few nights, he hadn't shared the Patronus revelation with Hermione, nor the feelings that had allowed him to conjure it. He struggled with how to tell her he loved her, and whether he even should. They had only been together for 3 months. Was it too soon? Would it reveal too much? Draco had never been this open with anyone before, but the thought of confessing his love and facing silence in return was unbearable. They already had enough on their plates, especially now that Weasley was back in the picture. They hadn't yet decided how or when to share their relationship with him, but they both knew they needed to do it before he found out on his own. Weasley's voice broke through his thoughts. What was your Patronus, then, Malfoy? He asked, curiosity sparking in his tone. Please tell me it was a ferret, Draco said with a grin, very funny. It was a hippogriff, Hermione replied, her tone teasing. Of course, she added, a knowing smile spreading across her face, which made Draco's palms tingle with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Not bad, Potter chimed in, grinning as well. All right, then, let's talk to Ollivander. They found the wand maker in the familiar downstairs bedroom, just as they always did. He had made a full recovery from his time imprisoned at Malfoy Manor, though he seemed a bit jumpier than before. The bedroom had been transformed into a bustling wand-maker's workshop. Metal tools revolved slowly on a long table beneath the window, while baskets filled with wandwood lined the walls. Before the battle, Ginny and Luna had assisted Ollivander in his wand-making, but now Ginny had shifted her focus back to the pamphlet campaign, which had expanded significantly following the Azkaban breakout. Their reinformation flyover, scheduled for late March, now included many smaller towns with sizable wizarding populations, although the riskiest drops would still take place at the Ministry, Hogsmeade, and Diagon Alley. Meanwhile, Luna was still recovering from the burning curse. Ollivander, who had grown fond of her during their shared captivity, had insisted that she could continue helping with wand-making during her waking hours if she wished. As Draco entered Ollivander's room after the others, he spotted Luna dozing on the bed. They exchanged glances, and Draco pondered whether they should return later when she wasn't there, but she rarely left the wand-maker's side these days. For now, her sleeping presence was likely the best they could hope for. The others seemed to reach the same conclusion. Potter spoke softly to avoid waking her. Mr. Ollivander, we have some questions to ask you. The old man looked up, lowering a glimmering strand of unicorn hair. Since their first inquiry about the Elder Wand shortly after his rescue, he had appeared wary of them. More questions about our previous discussion? Ollivander asked, a hint of reluctance in his voice. Miss Granger has scheduled me to assist with kitchen duties this evening. We won't take much of your time, Potter replied, pointing his wand at the closed door. Muffliato. Very well. What would you like to know, Mr. Potter? Is there another way to win the Elder Wand's allegiance besides killing its previous owner? Ollivander raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yes, of course, he said, settling into a chair, his white hair glowing softly in the sunset light. While the Elder Wand's allegiance has often been linked to murder, that's mainly due to the insatiable thirst it inspires in its seekers. Among those of us who study wand lore, there's a common belief that a display of force, of mastery, is enough to bend one wizard's wand to another's will. Right, Weasley chimed in, but what we mean is, you definitely need to defeat the previous owner somehow, right? You couldn't just. He glanced uncomfortably at Draco. Hold it for a while or cast some spells with it until it warms up to you? Ollivander brushed a wisp of hair from his wrinkled forehead. The connection between a wand and its wizard is a complex one, Mr. Weasley. Fleeting connections continuously form between wands and wizards, shaped by power, desire, ownership, and surrender. This principle holds true not just for the death stick. He sighed. However, for a wand to recognize a new master, that new master must, in some way, best the old. But then, Weasley said, his bewilderment evident as he glanced at Draco again. Before he could finish, Potter interjected, clearly eager to steer the conversation away. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. We appreciate your help. Of course, Ollivander replied, rising with a look of satisfaction that the conversation had come to a close. Excuse me. I have dinner duties to attend to. The frail old man slipped out the door, leaving something stirring in the back of Draco's mind. Thoughts began to swirl in his mind, coalescing into a new understanding. He absent-mindedly brushed the cool wood of the Elder Wand tucked in his pocket. The new master must best the old, yet the wand had worked for him. Just as he was about to voice his thoughts, a voice interrupted the silence. All four of them jumped and turned toward the bed. Draco had completely forgotten Luna was there. Were you talking about the Elder Wand? She asked, lying on her side with her large eyes half open, her hair a tangle from several days in bed. They exchanged startled glances. Why, have you heard of it? Ron asked, his curiosity piqued. Of course, Luna replied, her voice gaining strength as if the conversation were the most natural thing in the world. But I must admit, I'm surprised that you four know about the Deathly Hallows. The what? Ron replied, confusion written on his face. Draco stared at Luna, realizing they'd encountered that term before, but where? Had they stumbled upon it in a book during their research? Hermione beat him to the answer. The Deathly Hallows, she whispered, her eyes widening. Rita mentioned them. Bathilda overheard someone talking about it. In an instant, they were all crowded around Luna's bedside. Harry crouched down to meet her gaze, urgency in his voice. Luna, what is that? What are the Deathly Hallows? Oh, the quest for the Hallows is a very ancient one. My father has been a quester for a long time, she replied, reaching for her wand on the bedside table. I'd like to join him someday. With the tip of her wand, she traced a fiery symbol in the air, one they all recognized. It was a line enclosed by a circle, both surrounded by a triangle, resembling a triangular. Questers believe that the Hallows are described in the tale of the three brothers, Luna continued. I'm sure you heard the story growing up, Ron, Draco. The Elder Wand is at the center, you see? She pointed to the line. The circle represents the resurrection stone, and the triangle is the cloak of invisibility. Together, she said with a dreamlike finality, they make a wizard the master of death. As Draco followed the others back upstairs into the nursery, silence enveloped them. Even after the door was locked and the nursery was protected by Muffliato, the stillness remained. So, Potter finally broke the quiet after several minutes. Dumbledore wasn't just trying to tell us about the Elder Wand. This was what he meant, this was what he and Grindelwald were after. The Deathly Hallows. Come off it, Weasley replied, his face a mask of horror. You think he wanted us to find all three, on top of the Horcruxes? Blimey, that's asking a lot, isn't it? Hold on, Hermione interjected, her voice filled with disbelief. All three what? You two can't really believe that this resurrection stone exists. Potter continued, seemingly undeterred by her question. Dumbledore didn't need us to find all three Hallows, he said quietly. He knew we already had one. What? Draco exclaimed, his tone sharp. What do you mean? Dumbledore borrowed my parents' invisibility cloak before they died, Potter explained. Remember what you said about my cloak? How it was strange it had lasted this long, it was passed down through my family. Dumbledore must have realized what that meant. He knew it was one of the Hallows. Something unusual flickered in Potter's expression. There was a light in his green eyes that Draco had never seen before. The closest comparison was the intense focus Draco had occasionally witnessed when Potter was about to catch the snitch, much to Draco's dismay. Harry, wait, Hermione said, her voice tinged with concern, but Potter pressed on without pausing. So, Dumbledore knew we had one Hallow already. And then in his will, he left us another. Did he? Weasley asked weakly. Yes, Potter confirmed, reaching into the moleskin pouch around his neck. This snitch, I've been wondering for months what it means, why he would have left it to me. It says, eye open, at the end of it all. I wondered what could possibly fit inside that snitch that would be of any use, perhaps a dose of Felix Felicis or something similar. But now it all makes sense. Harry's voice rose, the fire in his eyes intensifying. Last year, Dumbledore showed me a memory of the Horcrux he destroyed, the ring. There was something engraved on it, and Riddle's grandfather was boasting about it. It was the symbol of the Hallows, I'm sure of it. The stone in the ring was the resurrection stone, and after Dumbledore destroyed it, he left the stone to me. It's in here. Harry held up the snitch. He accounted for 2 of the Hallows. Draco imagined Dumbledore sitting down to write his will, picturing the old man's frail hand resting on the parchment, the ancient fingers inscribing the symbol of the Hallows into the tales of Beedle the Bard. Cloak. Stone. Wand. Suddenly, the last piece clicked into place in Draco's mind, and time seemed to freeze. His numbed hand slipped into his pocket and closed around the Elder Wand. You're wrong, Potter, he said, his voice low. He accounted for all 3. The Gryffindors turned to him, Hermione and Ron looking incredulous, while Harry remained alert. How? Harry asked sharply. That night on the astronomy tower, Draco explained, when you and Dumbledore arrived. I disarmed him. He pulled the Elder Wand from his pocket. I disarmed Dumbledore. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, as if it had been sucked out entirely. The others stood frozen, not even daring to breathe. Draco glanced down at the shimmering wood in his hand. This was why the wand felt so right in his grasp, as natural as his own ever had. It was the reason the Patronus had come to him. They didn't need to win the wand's allegiance from Snape. The complex history of the Elder Wand had already led it back to its rightful master. And Dumbledore knew that, Harry whispered, so all we had to do was find the wand. It would have been simple if he'd been buried with it. You and your family were supposed to be safe at headquarters. It was as if he left us a map. Draco nodded, yet he should have felt victorious, triumphant, even exhilarated. Instead, as he gazed at the Elder Wand, a profound sense of disconnection washed over him. Thoughts collided in his mind, a whirlwind of hypotheticals swirling in and out of focus. If only he had known that the unbeatable wand was within his grasp. He would have wielded it at Azkaban from the very beginning. Would things have unfolded differently? Perhaps he could have cast a spell to prevent Oliver Wood and Augusta Longbottom from charging into danger. Could he have enchanted the entire group to flee faster, to escape? In those final moments, what if he had managed to overpower Crabbe, Greyback, and that ministry wizard, with the Elder Wand, he could have conjured a protective shield, seized Andromeda's arm, and fled, knowing they could survive the onslaught. He bit down on his tongue, tasting longing, frustration, and bitterness, but then, a whisper echoed in his memory, his aunt's voice. "Don't look back," she had urged him, those were her last words. It took a monumental effort, but Draco pulled himself away from the tumult of what-ifs. He was alive, Hermione was alive. The Order, his friends, his parents, they were all here. He needed to focus on the future, on what the wand could offer. It might just be the key to what lay ahead, even if it could never unlock the past. "I've got to get this open." Potter's voice, thick with excitement, emerged as a near croak. Draco looked up to see Potter turning the snitch over and over in his hands. The intensity in his gaze had grown. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "This is the key, Master of Death. That's what Dumbledore wanted me to become, so I could defeat Voldemort. This is the only way," Harry insisted. "No, Harry, it's not," Hermione countered, turning to Draco and Ron for support. "Please, think about this logically. The key is to destroy the Horcruxes. Maybe he left you the ring, and maybe he didn't. Perhaps Dumbledore even believed it was the Resurrection Stone, but nothing will help us defeat Voldemort if we don't find and destroy Hufflepuff's cup and then kill Nagini." Her words barely registered with Harry, who remained fixated on the snitch, his head moving in a vague, uncertain manner. "She's right, mate, come on," Ron urged. "We need to keep our heads straight. If Malfoy's right, we already have the wand, and that's the most important one, isn't it? We can use it to defeat you-know-who in the end. Forget about the stone, we have to finish off those Horcruxes." But Draco noticed how Harry's body had turned toward the crib in the corner of the nursery. And in that moment, he understood what Harry was really after. "It's not going to bring them back," Draco said softly. Only then did Harry's gaze shift away from the snitch, his shoulders tensing defensively. "Your parents," Draco continued, "Dumbledore. Sirius Black. My aunt and uncle." His throat tightened. "Look, I get it, Potter. I wish there was a way to. If I could have." He gripped the Elder Wand tightly. "Don't look back," Andromeda's voice echoed in his mind. Draco's resolve solidified, "But they're all gone. And if we don't find the next Horcrux, others will join them." Harry shook his head in frustration, returning his attention to the snitch. "You're not listening," he said, agitation creeping into his voice. "Don't you understand? If we open this, we can ask Dumbledore himself what he wanted us to do. I've seen things like this before, priori incantatem. It saved my life in 4th year. It didn't bring them back, but I could see them again. They were there, parts of them are still here." Potter's head shot up, a spark of excitement igniting in his voice. "Maybe Dumbledore had a clue about where to find the cup, and he wanted us to reach out to him using the Resurrection Stone." The room fell silent, each of them at a loss for words. Draco exchanged a glance with Hermione, noting the sadness in her eyes. He fought to mask his sympathy, aware that it would only infuriate Potter further, but it seemed Potter could sense the emotions swirling around them. Anger flashed across his face as he adjusted his glasses. "Fine, then. I'll figure out how to open it myself." With that, he stormed out of the nursery, leaving Draco, Hermione, and Weasley behind.